Love staying informed? Subscribe now and get unlimited access to local news, weather, and sports for just 99 cents a month for your first 3 months at inforum.news/join. Read every story, listen to every podcast, and download the apps that keep you informed and on the go 24 hours a day. So head to inforum.news/join right now to subscribe. What are you waiting for? Get 3 months of local news for just 99 cents a month at inforum.news/join.
Hey friends, we've got a new way for you to participate in the show. You can now call us or text us with your questions, comments, or anything you want us to discuss on Plain Talk. Just give us a call or shoot us a text message at 701-587-3141. That's 701-587-3141. It's super easy. Leave your message, tell us your name and where you're from, and we might feature it on an upcoming episode.
Thanks for listening to Plain Talk. Now let's get back to today's episode.
You're listening to Plain Talk, the voice of North Dakota politics. I'm your host, Rob Port. It's embarrassment to every elected official. Now, a lot of them aren't going to talk about it that way because they're afraid. I'm joined by my co-host, Chad Oban.
The only thing at my house is my kid will be a Dodgers fan. That's the only thing that is sort of pre-described at our house.
I think it's cathartic. I think it's a necessary and proper debate. I'm glad we're having it.
You let me talk for 30 seconds in the first 15 minutes. So I'm gonna just talk for a while now, okay?
It's becoming something that we talk about a lot.
Somebody described you as Raging Rob. We got to get through this election, bring you down a little bit.
Yeah.
You're too angry.
Okay. I don't know why I'm getting blamed for this, right?
Thankfully, I don't think Rob can legislate authority to us, so.
Oh, challenge accepted.
No, I cannot. We are all overestimating Rob's influence a great deal here.
I mean, we're trying to get people to actually listen to this podcast.
Politics is tough, and nobody wants to lose, and it gets dicey, it can get cruel, it can because everybody wants to be that choice.
I love everything about North Dakota. I love this place. We're so lucky and blessed with everything in North Dakota, and we have a real opportunity to continue to grow this economy and grow our state.
This has been a fascinating interview, and I feel like we could go for another half hour.
It's crazy how things change.
I love Minot. It's my home. And you don't ever have to be sorry or apologize for loving your home. Merry Christmas, everyone. By the time you're listening to this, it will be Christmas Day. In fact, we scheduled this show to drop on Christmas, so I hope you're all having a wonderful holiday, getting ready to head into what I hope is a hopeful new year. But we're going to spend this show doing a little bit of year in review, and I got to tell you, a lot's happened, both obviously with my writing and coverage, but also with this podcast. We've come a long way. I think we've really been leaning into it. We've been enjoying it. Chad, maybe not enjoying it as much as I am.
Well, I'm glad you're seeing the benefits of the Oban bump and how it made your year much better. I sort of question who's listening to this podcast on Christmas Day. And so I would encourage people to comment on Facebook or send a note to Rob and, what's going on in your life where you're taking an hour break to listen to these two yahoos talk about politics on Christmas Day. I hope you're listening to it after Christmas.
Well, that's true. Please, if you're listening to this on Christmas Day, hit pause, go spend some time with your friends and family. That's a better way to spend this. The nice thing about podcasts,
or if you need some time away, go ahead, listen to the next hour to our soothing voices, which will bring some calmness to your Christmas.
Don't be like me and work on Christmas Day, because I've done that, and that's not a very good thing to do. And I'm trying not to do that. I'm trying to be better about that. I complain all the time about having to take vacations and stuff because I love doing this stuff. I love it. I get it. And if you love it that much too, that's great. But spending time with your family is good. I do have some stats. If just for 2024, if people are listening, we added 64% more listeners. We had 120% increase in the number of people downloading, streaming this. We had 71% more followers. We had a really good year growing this podcast. And Chad, I guess let's start though, kind of year in review, looking back on the year that was 2024. It was a big year politically, obviously an election year. We came through what were some very interesting primaries for the Republicans. I think at the end of the day, we didn't see a revolution in North Dakota. The people who are winning these elections are still very much mainstream. Well, mainstream's the wrong word for it now. MAGA Trumpism is mainstream in the Republican Party. But I would say the quote unquote establishment did a pretty good job holding on in the legislature, pretty good job holding on in statewide office. Although it's going to be interesting. I mean, I felt like this is the year the gloves really came off in terms of some things. I don't know if you agree with that, but in terms of sort of the divide in the Republican Party that's been percolating for multiple cycles now, this is the year I think where the mask came off, the gloves came off, and I'm kind of interested the next cycle, what things are going to look like.
Well, I'm interested in this next legislative session, what this looks like, right? We know that Ben Koppelman ran for majority leader and got about 27 votes. I think that pretty well identifies who those folks are on the House side. The Senate side, I think that sort of caucus, the Bastiat MAGA caucus, although it's really getting harder and harder from a traditional Republican, a mainstream, to your point, that it is Trump, right? That is Trump. So even the more mainstream traditional Republicans are going to they have a Trumpy streak to them. They have to in today's Republican Party. But I do think we saw the traditional Republicans push back much harder in the primary in terms of winning, and not just like air attacks like we've seen in previous from super PACs, but, boots on the ground, really winning in some tough rural places where I think both you and I expected the sort of MAGA Bastiat folks to be more successful than they were. It was a good primary, but then again, in the general, we saw Jim Casper and Jared Hendricks. And so I would say that, the traditional Republicans push back, but probably about a wash in terms of governing with numbers. The interesting thing, are the traditional Republicans going to continue to push back during the session on the policy that's being pushed from the fringes?
What would be interesting to me, because I think the primary and the general, you're always talking about obviously two very different electorates. And with the primary, part of me wonders what would have happened if Hendricks and a Casper had faced a primary challenge, like somebody who went out there to just push them off the ballot, where the people who might not like a Jared Hendricks or might not like a Jim Casper had another Republican to vote for. Because I think in North Dakota, there's a lot of North Dakotans who maybe aren't very happy with those sorts of leaders, but they're not so unhappy that they're ready to cross the line and vote for a Democrat.
I think that's fair. I think that's a really good point, that voting for a Democrat, even a good, normal, moderate Democrat like Todd Reisenauer and some of those folks that we saw.
Hamida Dakane, who is, if you look at her voting record, is very moderate.
Right. And that just might be a bridge too far. But in addition to those partisan races, I mean, you saw Rick Becker take two absolutely huge losses this past year. He got hammered in the primary by Julie Fedorchak by a margin that I don't think anybody saw coming. And then obviously his defeat on Measure 4. Rick Becker got his tail handed to him this past year. And I think it's going to lead to maybe some new folks taking up that mantle of the leadership of that wing of the party.
It's interesting you say that, because it's not like Becker lost for want of resources either. He had some very deep-pocketed national groups. He had Senator Rand Paul's organization behind him. He had some other national groups behind him. They blitzed this state with ads. They really dropped it in. And the thing about, say whatever else you want about Becker, but Becker's people are passionate. They're true activists. So you can't really argue that he didn't have the ground game and he didn't have the resources. They were there for him. He just didn't win. I just think fundamentally, Rick Becker is a bridge too far for a lot of North Dakotans. And I think that speaks to what I said about the primary. In the primary, Republican voter, they had several other options, Julie Fedorchak obviously being the most popular one. Not only did she win a five-way, what was on paper at least a five-way primary, was probably more of a three-way primary in as a practical matter, but not only did she win it, she went on to be the top vote getter statewide, beating. And now, I say that, we could probably put an asterisk next to Kelly Armstrong's. He was in a three-way race on the general election. Michael Coachman sucked up, what was it, 15,000 votes or something like that. So he, Armstrong is arguably there, but I mean, Fedorchak, really good year. And I say that too, there was some doubts about her ability to be a candidate. I mean, I don't think there were ever any doubts about her ability to do the job, her being at the PSC and everything. But there's always that question, just because somebody's really good at doing the job doesn't mean that they're good at politics.
They're two different skill sets, right? I mean, a wise man once described some of our leaders as having razzle-dazzle when describing Kelly Armstrong and Senator Kramer. But no, I think you're right. And I think that one of the things you mentioned, sort of Fedorchak getting the most votes, one of my other takeaways from this November election is the idea of crossover voters is currently a thing in the past. I mean, you saw up and down the ballot, Republicans in districts, statewide, whatever, all getting about the same amount of votes within a point or two, no matter how good or poor of a campaign they ran. And then the same thing on the Dem side, when you have Tim Lamb getting the same percentage as Katrina Christensen. Obviously, their opponents ran different campaigns as well, but it just feels like we've talked about this a lot. Like when John Hoeven and Kent Conrad were on the same ballot and both getting 70% of the vote, a Democrat and a Republican. Those days are long past. And I think when we've talked a lot about how do you appeal to the other side, I worry that there's no such thing as a swing voter anymore, and people are going to get even firmer and firmer into their camp to motivate their base. Because going back to one of your previous points, I think if Rick Becker would have been running against Trigby Hammer as an R versus D, Rick Becker probably would have been elected a congressman if he could have got through that primary.
Yeah. And I think you're right. Those people who were voting for both John Hoeven and Kent Conrad, or John Hoeven or other Republicans and Earl Pomeroy or what have you, most of them are still alive. I mean, it wasn't that long ago. It's not like they died out. It's just they're not willing to do that anymore. And I think that was really kind of the lesson here is it's about partisanship. And really, if those who are interested in sort of maybe resisting MAGAism to the point where it hasn't just taken over, but there's still a stylistic difference, I would argue, between the very, very MAGA. I mean, you can see the factions still. And certainly when Republicans talk in the background, they're not nearly as united in their support of Trump as they are publicly. But, perception is reality. They're all in the same camp now. But to the extent that people who want to, see a different change of path, it's almost like you have to work within the Republican Party, because North Dakota voters just they're certainly not nearly enough of them are going to vote for a Democrat.
Yeah, I was thinking this morning, back in the day when I was managing campaigns on the Democrat side, it was always, you need to get 95% or 100% of the Democrats, 65, 68% of independents, and then like 15% of the Republicans. That was an equation that worked at one point when Byron and Earl were delivering on the Farm Bill and constituent services and all that sort of stuff. It's not an equation that works anymore, because the Republican base has gotten bigger, the Democrat base has gotten smaller, and I think that independent group is so much more conservative or more likely to vote Republican now than they were back then. I think we're seeing it nationally, and it's bleeding into North Dakota, and it's a tough equation for Democrats to overcome.
I would push back a little bit. I think it's an equation that doesn't work for Democrats running in our part of the world. It does still work for John Hoeven. John Hoeven, back to the razzle dazzle thing. I think I wrote that he was all razzle and no dazzle, because he is very, very fun. I mean, you hear him talk. He is laser focused on these issues. Now, come campaign, when it was time to beat back Becker's challenge to him in the 2022 cycle, he brought in Trump. He did some of that kind of stuff, but that's not really him. He is still and it works for him. And the thing is because, I think the issue is partisanship. It's not policy, anything. It's partisanship.
And that was the point I was making. That equation doesn't work for Democrats, because to get 65 or 70% of independent votes right now, with who the independents are and the things they care about, they're not voting for Democrats. John Hoeven can get 75% of the Republican or independents pretty easily. Hell, he can get 15% of the Democrats pretty easily right now. Just a smaller equation. It's just hard to make it's hard to be competitive as a Democrat right now in the state with all the elections being nationalized. I mean, you're going to be looking at a future for Democrats where it's going to be a presidential race or a U.S. senator or Congress person on the top of the ticket moving forward. That really nationalizes these things in a way that's difficult for Dems to try to make things local.
Our next cycle, we don't have neither of the senators are on the ballot, so it'll be just Fedorchak at the top, and because we won't have a governor either, or no governor's race either. So Fedorchak at the top of the ticket, and then like Secretary of State, I think would probably be the next. Yeah.
So I think there's a great opportunity for Democrats nationally in 2026. We know historically, the second the election after a president gets elected, their party usually has a bad year. Or have a situation that you just laid out where you're going to have Fedorchak running for a second term. I think she's going to be a very good legislator, but she isn't the most bombastic candidate. I think there might be some opportunities to pick up seats down ballot in legislative races for Democrats in 2026.
They could be. I mean, we also start every cycle saying that, and then it doesn't happen. It didn't happen this cycle.
History does say that on year 6, and this is a little different because Trump took 4 years off in the middle. And here's the deal: maybe history doesn't matter in today's politics.
Well, that was the point I was going to make. Is I don't know. I mean, because you're right. I mean, historically, that is the conventional wisdom. That is right. But we just elected a president who was impeached twice. We just, I don't know. I don't know what to say about that. I feel like a lot of that kind of stuff is out the window. It's going to be interesting, the dynamic, Trump being a lame duck. It's going to be how really energetic he is about pursuing some of this stuff. I'm really going to be interested in seeing how committed he still is to getting out on the campaign trail. Because
Rob, I'm smirking a little bit here because you're assuming that he accepts the fact that he's a lame duck and that he won't try to run for a third term.
I don't want to contemplate on that at this point. I know that some of his louder followers are out there. I just don't know if we go down that road. I don't see who could support that. I don't. Anyway, let's not go down that road. Let's not go out.
Support that.
Yeah. Yeah. I know. We're through the looking glass on a lot of this stuff. So I don't know. I do want to talk a little bit about sort of in the legislative races specifically, the MAGA pushback. I think that was a big story. And the fact that the slate of candidates backed by Brandon Pritchard and, the sort of the fundraising he did. Now, I want to give some credit there. He raised some money and they were very, very active. They were active on the activist level, door knocking and everything. They were active on the ad level. I mean, those are legitimate legislative campaigns they ran and they lost. Now, some of those losses were pretty narrow. I mean, some of those Republican incumbents held on by the skin of their teeth, but they did lose. And I'm still trying to understand what the difference is between North Dakota and South Dakota, because in South Dakota, you look at their primary, they have the same sort of insurgency, and they mostly won from the sort of MAGA right. In North Dakota, they mostly, almost entirely lost. I mean, I don't think they gained at all, if I'm remembering right. So I don't know. I still don't know that I have a satisfactory answer for why that happened.
Well, I'm going to give you my theory, and then you can tell me why it's not satisfactory. I think the issues were different, right? I think Brandon Pritchard and his crew really made it about social issues, and they went over the top. When you're saying, people like Representative John Nelson, who is well known by his friends and neighbors as somehow a pornographer or those kind of things, it's too far, right? When they're sending out things in the mail with genitals and that kind of thing into South Bismarck and, accusing respected legislators of being in favor of that stuff.
Todd Porter.
Jeremy Porter's a perfect example.
Jeremy Olson out west in Watford City.
Yeah, these are people that their friends and neighbors know, and this was too far, and it was gross politics. South Dakota was about a pipeline, right? I mean, I think that's what really motivated people, the Summit pipeline. It was a little bit different. When I talked to my friends in South Dakota who, were supporter of those traditional Republicans, they were frustrated because, all these guys are so great on so many issues. And because of this pipeline and sort of the frustration around the Summit pipeline, it tossed a bunch of these guys out. I mean, including, I think, like the Speaker of House and like some real leadership people. So I think that the issues were different. We didn't see the blowback on Summit. I mean, we hear it some, but not politically the way they do in South Dakota.
Do you think that's because Summit is and we had Adam Willis on, and I guess we talked a little bit about this earlier this year. And I think we all agreed that Summit in North Dakota is just not the issue it is in South Dakota. And I think that's probably why, the people who were running primary challenges steered away from it. It's not as potent an issue here.
Yeah, and I think that North Dakotans know energy better than South Dakotans, right? I mean, we have coal, we have oil. Those are things that aren't as prominent in South Dakota. So I think people have the fundamental, and I think Adam made this point. They just understand, and their energy industry has been seen as somewhat fringy, although I worry that's not the case as much anymore. In South Dakota, they weren't seen as fringy. They were seen as landowners who were standing up for their communities.
Well, I think that makes a lot of sense. So, I guess, and it could be maybe they just have better spokespeople. I mean, that's part of the problem too. Is you look at some of the spokespeople for, the anti-Summit pipeline feelings are, people like Jeff Magrum, people like Rick Becker. Frankly, I mean, although he's less outspoken on the pipeline, at least that I've seen, but. I think that they're just not very credible people, or they're very polarizing people. They certainly have their following, but I think it's just tough for them to get a lot of traction. I am curious to see because things are starting to come to a head with Summit. We saw the permit approval here in North Dakota. There's been a permit approval in Iowa, permit approval in Minnesota. There is that story out there about like a weird, like right-wing newspaper that got mailed to a bunch of people. So Summit, at times I get very frustrated with Summit. Because I feel
they've dropped the ball a lot.
Yeah. And in some way, as somebody who very much supports carbon capture as something that I think is going to be very good for North Dakota long term, it worries me that Summit has been given their propensity to drop the ball. And I fully support the Summit project, don't get me wrong. But given how often that they have put their foot in it, it makes me worry that they're kind of the face of carbon capture in North Dakota right now. That's troubling to me.
No, I agree with that. And yep, I agree with that 100%, that they probably haven't done the carbon capture industry much with the work that they've been doing here.
The other theme kind of for 2024 is that it really seems that not just, I mean, Donald Trump has been Teflon pretty much his whole life. Every attempt to hold this guy accountable seems to fail, whether it's because, he's just got really good lawyers, he finds a loophole, or frankly, the people trying to hold him accountable are themselves flawed and end up shooting themselves in the foot. But we really saw politically where that just resilience to the sort of scandal that would end political careers at another level has metastasized to the local level. I think of, this time last year, I was breaking a story about State Representative Nico Rios behaving in a way, I don't care if you're a Republican, I don't care if you're a Democrat. I mean, he ran the whole gamut of everything that a elected official shouldn't do. He verbally abused two law enforcement officers who were just doing their jobs and doing a good job. He used vile language, homophobic language, racist language, and also tried to use his political power, such as it is. He was name dropping the Attorney General, which, by the way, the Attorney General had nothing to do with. I want to make clear. But he's I'm a state, he pulled the you know who I am card, basically. He did all of those things. It's like he checked every box. And Nico Rios is still in office. Now, in fairness, he hasn't faced re-election, but he hasn't resigned in shame. He hasn't been recalled. We heard some rumblings early on, but that fizzled. the majority leader, his majority leader of the Republican caucus, called on him to resign. And really, Mike LaFleur faced more blowback from that situation than Nico Rios ever did, because by the time we got to springtime and we had the Republican convention in Fargo, there was a concerted effort, an organized effort that took hours to settle on the convention floor to unseat the delegates from Majority Leader LaFleur's district. And I'm looking at that situation, and it's just, there's not a, I mean, we talked about partisanship earlier in the show and how it just seems to trump everything else. Well, it also seems to trump just basic human decency.
Personal responsibility is not something that voters care about in the Trump era, right? I mean, it's just not something they care about. I think Nico Rios has showed you can do all these vile things. You can have the majority leader call for your resignation. You can have the state chairwoman call for your resignation for a little while and then pull that back.
And then, Sandy Sanford sure walked that back.
And all he did was do nothing. And come January 7th, he's going to be sitting in his chair in the legislature. We had up in Grand Forks a series of different things, including Scott Meyer threatening violence against his opponent. Nothing there. We had Sarah Grossbar with some pictures. She lost, so she's not going to Bismarck. But that just seems like time and time again, things that would normally cause somebody to resign or be such a huge scandal, just they don't matter anymore. And I don't think there's anybody to blame for that except for the voters. The voters voted for Scott Meyer knowing perfectly well that he threatened. That's what they want. I mean, they agree with his partisanship. They agree with his policies, and that trumps the other things that maybe he's done. Same with Nico Rios. Nico Rios, if Nico Rios gets to the primary, he's going to get reelected.
And even if we talk about Sarah Grossbauer, where, she didn't, I mean, she lost, but I think she was going to lose anyway. There's some pictures of her and it appeared as though she was using cocaine and that whole thing. You can look up that story, but even there, she didn't really underperform the other Democrat. So even among Democratic voters, there wasn't really a feeling that, maybe this is somebody we shouldn't have in office anymore. And I don't know. I don't know how to make sense of that, because on one hand, the most common thing in the world you'll hear from Joe Sixpack out in the public is, oh, they're all terrible. Oh, they're all corrupt. Nothing but disdain for elected officials. But then we get to election day and there's clear evidence of election officials who are behaving in ways that should be unacceptable. And yet they have no problem winning election. And people just fall into their usual partisan categories.
Yeah, I think that's exactly right. I mean, here's the deal. If you have the opinion that every elected official is corrupt, which I think is so offensive to the Republican and Democrat elected officials I've known over the years. But if you think they're all corrupt, then you're going to vote for the person who you agree with policy, right? And that's what people are doing. You're gonna and not even the person you agree with on policy, because I don't think policy matters a lot. You're going to vote for the person who's on your.
Yeah.
And that's what we're seeing here. And the reality is, until the voters start doing something about it, we're going to continue to have the same stuff.
It's like Red Sox fans making excuse for David Ortiz using steroids, right? Like, it's okay when my guy does it, but if it's Alex Rodriguez, it's the worst thing in the world. And the position should be, it's all bad. None of them should do it. I don't understand.
Unless it helps win World Series, then it's acceptable.
It is a struggle for me, and I am really worried about that development, that unwillingness to hold. It doesn't matter what people on my side, as long as they're on my team, I don't care about the norms. I don't care about the law. I don't care about holding people accountable anymore. And I don't know. We could point to a lot of places where it started. We could say Democrats circling the wagons around Bill Clinton when he was when he was impeached. We could point to Republicans circling the wagons around Republic. I mean, it's just gotten worse. I mean, it's gotten to the point where we're not even pretending anymore. We're not even pretending.
Do you remember, like, during Obama's administration when there'd be, like, 2 weeks of coverage on him wearing a tan suit?
Yeah.
Or things that were just, like, it was such nothing burgers compared to
Like he slipped up and said he said we had 57 states one time or something.
yeah,
Everybody.
and, we talked about that weeks and weeks and weeks. I mean, those things wouldn't even be a blip these days because of all the craziness. I keep going back to when Trump said I could shoot somebody on Fifth Avenue and nobody would care. He ain't wrong. That was ridiculous at the time, but it ain't wrong. I think Trump has changed sort of the level of concern. Did it start with Clinton? Did it start somewhere else? Is it a top down or bottom up problem? Probably a bottom up.
Yeah, probably a little of both. I mean, the people at the top don't mind getting away with this stuff. They don't mind it, and the voters are going to let them. And why wouldn't they? Why wouldn't they?
Rob, going back to Nico Rios, I mean, if you're now a elected official who gets in trouble, don't you just do nothing and just ignore it and know it's going to go away?
Just wait for the news cycle to move on.
Yep.
Which is sometimes people say, well, you're obsessed about this thing, Port. You keep writing about it over and over again. It's like, because it should matter to you. And I'm trying not to just let it fade into the background. But, there's people that just, there's no limits anymore. And I think there may come a day where we regret that.
So I think the most interesting character in North Dakota politics this year is Doug Burgum. When you think about it at the beginning of the year when I think he'd ended his presidential campaign and then the sort of full on campaign to be the vice president, then a member of the cabinet. We all thought he was running for a third term, and then he dropped that bomb that he wasn't running, which opened things up for Kelly. I mean, there's a guy who has done a full 180 in the last 12 months. And I think when I think back at the year, he just was so involved in every domino in North Dakota politics. It's pretty amazing that this guy's gone from somebody who Democrats are like, I really like that guy, he's a normal guy, to a the Trumpiest Trumper who ever trumped during the campaign.
I think that's another one. I think that's another one of my lines.
Yeah.
Well, although I think I used it on his protege, Tammy Miller, I think is who I wrote.
Yeah, there you go. But yeah, I mean, I don't know, like, just the fact that he is the reason why Kelly Armstrong is the governor right now, it's because he chose not to run. I mean, literally was so involved in where we're at right now on the end of the year in 2024.
Although the interesting, it's not a counterpoint, but I guess corollary is to Kelly Armstrong's governor because Doug Burgum didn't run. Well, it's not like Doug Burgum didn't try to have somebody else be governor.
For sure.
He ran Tammy Miller, and it just didn't work for Tammy Miller, which I think speaks to the fact that some of that stuff. I mean, she tried to be the Trump thing, and so that's kind of a weird thing. Like, we're saying nothing matters as long as you're on my team. Well, Tammy did try to be the Trumpiest Trumper who ever trumped. I mean, it was hard to find a picture of her in her campaign without Donald Trump in it. She really
is running against a guy who also embraced Donald Trump.
Yeah.
And I mean, brought forward the papers against Biden to be impeached and all. But Kelly, it's hard to categorize Kelly Armstrong as anything but a conservative Republican, right?
Right. But there's some fundamentals still at play where I think Kelly's just better at politics. Kelly's a more appealing candidate for North Dakota voters, and Tammy Miller, one of the worst campaigns I think I have seen. I'm trying to think of a worse one. I mean, of a serious contender, not like a, and not to be mean to like a Tracy Potter or something, or a placeholder candidate who just kind of, threw their name in because Democrats needed somebody, but like somebody who came in, was well funded, spent a lot of money, ran a big boy campaign, and just got decimated. In my lifetime, I can't think of a worse one. I don't know if there's another one that's as bad.
Yeah, I can't think of any either. And I mean, but we said throughout that primary, she never had a path to victory. Whoever was encouraging her to run or telling her she had a path, there was never a path for her because you couldn't get to the right of Kelly. It's the only place you can win a primary in North Dakota is getting to the right. She couldn't do that. She didn't have the personality. I mean, Kelly we kept saying it, Kelly's not Wayne Stencham, right? And I think we saw that when Kelly threw the first punch in that race. He was not waiting. He was well-funded, and he ran as bad as her campaign was, his campaign was that good.
Yeah, he ran. Yeah, and I don't want to take that away. I mean, that's always the question, right? Did they win or did we lose? Both happened. Kelly Armstrong ran a tremendous campaign. Tammy Miller ran a really bad campaign, and really one of the worst political ads I've ever seen too, where she came out using the story of a couple of sexual assault survivors, using it for her political story, trying to paint her opponent as being a basically condoning child molestation. I mean, I don't know what other point they were trying to make. Obviously, using the fact that Kelly Armstrong, as a defense attorney, represented this person in court as her defense attorney, and then it just colossally backfired because the survivors, who in some ways Tammy Miller was trying to paint as being victims of Kelly Armstrong, they came out and said, "We love Kelly. We support Kelly." Actively campaigned for Kelly, had campaign signs up for Kelly. I mean, talk about a backfire.
It felt like DC consultants were like, defense attorneys are bad. Everybody hates defense attorneys. What an opening. And we even saw with Burgum a little bit, right? I mean, we need a CEO, not an attorney, to be the governor of North Dakota. He'd make comments like that, which we're not.
It's Doug loves his talking points. He loves poll testing stuff. And the minute I knew, before I saw any of their message polling, before I saw any of the ads, I saw Doug Burgum, and he wasn't even opposing Armstrong at that point, but he did an interview and he referred to him as Lawyer Armstrong. And that is such an odd way. What a bizarre way. Nobody says that. Nobody, even people who are attorneys.
Columnist port.
Right. Nobody talks like that. So why would he do that? Because he's trying to shoehorn Kelly's a lawyer into it. And I thought that's where they're going. And boy, is that going to fail.
And it did. It failed overwhelmingly. I also think, again, in a small community, everybody knows a defense attorney. Everybody knows somebody who's needed a defense attorney. Not like some. It's not like Kelly Armstrong did.
It's one of the side effects of how many DUIs. Everybody knows that. Everybody knows a defense attorney is one of the side effects of so many people having a DUI in this state.
Yeah, for sure.
Including so many people in the legislature. Yeah, that's not a good thing, but it is a thing.
With all that being said, hey, yeah, Rob, Doug Burgum got where Doug Burgum wanted to go, and we've also talked about how amazing it is that this guy went from this little state governor to a absolute atrocious presidential race to one of the two finalists for vice president and now the interior secretary. I mean, the dude had a pretty good year, consider other than his lieutenant governor getting throttled in the primary in his presidential campaign, but he landed in a pretty darn good spot.
He did. Politically, yeah, he's done well. Policy-wise, even speaking as a conservative Republican, I wrote, obviously trying to consider what his legacy is. For a guy who wrote into office saying he was going to reinvent government, didn't happen. I don't think, maybe, and the voters probably don't care. But he overpromised and underdelivered. I think that's kind of his legacy.
Well, here's the deal. It's hard to reinvent government. I mean, you can't use a CEO. He wanted to come in and just snap his fingers and change things. And, this whole 3 branches of government thing is a real pain when you want to move as quick as Doug Burgum wanted to move on things.
So obviously our Burgum's gone. We could maybe pivot here a little bit and start looking forward. We're now in the Armstrong era. And what does that look like? What changes do you think?
Well, I think, you can tell the changes in the first 4 days. That was sarcasm. Obviously, you can't change that. You can't tell the change in the first 4 days. I think the biggest thing that we're going to see is transparency and accessibility for the governor. I think, this better than anyone. Kelly's not afraid to talk to a reporter. He's not afraid to respond to text messages. He's not afraid to take meetings with people who disagree with him. That's not exactly what Doug Burgum was at the end. He was very protective, maybe not because during his whole time, very protective about the meetings he took. It was very reliant on staff. I think Kelly's going to change the way that looks. I also think Kelly's going to have a different relationship with the legislature at the beginning, because currently he's seen as a legislator. That won't last for very long, but I think this first session, you're going to be seeing more singing kumbaya between the executive and legislative branch than we've historically seen.
Yeah, and the thing is, the legislature should protect its authority and its place in our three branch. That's the way it's designed to work. I don't want any legislature rolling over for any governor, or any governor rolling over for any legislature, as the case may be. So, but I think what Armstrong brings is an understanding to how that branch of government works on a visceral level, because he served there, and he served there very consequentially. So, I think Burgum in some ways just wasn't good at that kind of politics. He never was. I got a laugh out of him wanting to be Secretary of State, because he didn't handle, the diplomacy of governing North Dakota all that well.
But we also have to remember, when Doug Burgum came in to be governor, he had no political capital with the legislature, right? He spent his whole primary beating the hell out of them, saying they're good old boys, network, whatever. That's different than Kelly. Kelly's going to come in here with a lot of political capital. I think he's going to be smart in terms of how he burns it. He's not going to pick unnecessary fights with the legislature over small things. I think he's probably going to make sure the legislature gets quite a bit of credit when they do things on property taxes and those kind of things. So I think they're starting from a really different place in terms of relationships, but also in terms of how they ran their campaigns. One was crash and burn, and the other one was bring people in.
It was very funny. I watched Burgum's last industrial commission meeting, because I was writing a story about the double dipping executive director they have over there. But it was interesting to me, because when I'm watching, it's the it was like a 4.5 hour meeting. It's the closing 15 minutes. And, they're at the bottom of the agenda. And I mean, literally one of the last things they're discussing is when the next industrial commission meeting would be scheduled. And he was laughing. He was like, that's the only thing on the agenda I don't care about, because obviously he's not going to be governor for the next meeting. But he was still sitting there in that chair in the twilight minutes of his administration, dunking on the legislature. And I was like, he did not. I think that was probably the biggest lie that was told during his 8 years in office, was when he would go out and say they didn't have any problems with the legislature. Yes, you did. And it was apparent from every little jab, every little knife stab that you got in at him when you're delivering your state of the state address, or your budget address, or you're talking to the media. I mean, he was always good for a little elbow. So, I mean, it is what it is. And some of that, to a degree, is healthy. Don't get me wrong.
Yep.
But
listen, Ed Schaefer had problems with the legislature, right? John Oban had problems with the legislature. It's natural. But you're right. Doug Burgum took maybe some unnecessary shots at times that didn't help.
I remember back in the day when I was running Say Anything blog, I had written something. I had former House Majority Leader John Dorso was writing guest posts for me at times. And Ed Schaefer showed up in my comment section under one of the and John Dorso and Ed Schaefer were going at each other like they were majority leader and governor again. And I was like, boy, nothing has changed for these two gentlemen.
Yeah.
It was kind of a remarkable thing to watch. All right. So Armstrong, we're going to be heading into a new legislative session. Property taxes are the thing, and I feel like we've talked that to death, but obviously that's going to be a big one. It's going to be some of the appointment. I mean, obviously he's already made a lot of cabinet appointments. He's got a PSC post that he's got to appoint. I think that's going to be very interesting in the early running. Maybe by the time people listen to this, there'll have already been an appointment. I think I was actually looking back, and when Julie Fedorchak, which also funny, Julie Fedorchak got appointed to replace Kevin Cramer when Kevin Cramer was elected to the House of Representatives. Now Armstrong has to replace Fedorchak after she got elected to the House of Representatives. So she's kind of following Cramer up the ladder. But I'm really interested because Fedorchak did a lot of heavy lifting on that commission. And I'm not throwing shade at the other two commissioners, but I mean, I think a lot of people saw her as being the mover and shaker there. It's going to be very interesting who he chooses to replace her.
Yeah, I think it's also interesting to note that currently we don't have a member of Congress, right? Because Kelly put in his resignation. Julie's not sworn in yet. There's some significant things. By the time people listen to this, we'll know if the government is still open or not. But it's interesting. And so I think she's going to stay on as PSD commissioner until she gets sworn into Congress in early January. I think that appointment's interesting. I also think there's 2 open spots on the Board of Higher Ed that Kelly's going to appoint. I think that will send a pretty clear message of where he wants higher ed to go. But I'm excited about Kelly's sort of administration. I think one of the things he said right out of the chute was, we're going to do something about property taxes. That's the one place where he disagrees with Burgum. I know there's still legislators who are frustrated that they're getting blamed for property taxes, and there might be a little bit of pushback on that. But I get the sense that Kelly's going to say, we're doing property taxes before anything else. I think that's good, but I think the conversation between the executive and legislative will be interesting.
What is your sense of where he disagrees with Burgum? Because I was kind of trying. Burgum was pretty explicit. He said his biggest regret was allowing the state approaching property taxes through buy downs, is how I perceived his comments,
Right.
And not doing more from the state level to keep the debate at the local level. Is that what Armstrong disagrees on? Because I don't perceive that as being part of the disagreement.
I think the disagreement is prioritizing income taxes versus property taxes. I think Kelly's going to prioritize property taxes because income taxes aren't really the issue that folks are feeling out there. I also think Kelly's made it perfectly clear he ain't signing a bill that is just sending money down to the locals. If there isn't significant reform, he's sending it back to the legislature to figure out. And I think that's what has to happen if we want to see long-term changes with property taxes.
I think Burgum pushed income tax because he wanted to be able to say he delivered tax relief, and he didn't he didn't perceive what they were doing on property taxes as being real tax relief, and so he wanted to deliver it. And the income tax is a tax that the legislature levies, and I don't think we should or needed to lower the sales tax. So
I think the one thing Burgum missed, though, is he thought, hey, you're going to pay less in income taxes, so then you're going to be less mad about property taxes, or assuming that the voters saw the big picture of their tax bill as just one big burden. Me paying less in income taxes didn't make me less pissed about property taxes. Those were 2 completely different things in my head.
Yeah. Those things don't balance each other out. And income tax, at the scale that North Dakota taxes income tax, that relief can be hard to feel at times.
Right.
It doesn't make. It may change the withholding from your paycheck a little bit, but it ain't much.
Yeah, you're talking about dozens of dollars per paycheck, right? It's not.
It's not nothing. I don't want to make it sound like it doesn't matter. It matters, but it's hard. It's hard for voters to perceive.
Yeah. Well, I think currently 60% of North Dakotans aren't paying income taxes of any kind. So, they've lowered income taxes to a level that folks don't necessarily feel income taxes. I think it is somewhat unfair that all the property taxes being put on the legislature to fix. But guess what? That people want you to do something about it. They're in the position to do something broadly.
Yeah, well, the legislature is the right place for property tax reform. They write the laws, right? So if we want to talk about caps or we want to talk about structuring the tax differently, the legislature is the only one who can do it. The difference is if we just want to play with the numbers, the legislature is the wrong place to be making appropriations for. And that being said, I wouldn't mind us taking over K-12. The state, I think K-12 is a very unique. It's a unique line item on the property tax bill. I think it's very different from county, city, and some of the other things that are there, park district. I wouldn't mind us taking over K-12, but other than that, I think we got to do structural changes, and then we got to tell the locals, this is your problem.
Yeah. No, and I think making sure that there is some sort of release valve if there's a huge problem that, voters can increase their property taxes if there's some issue that comes up or if your population grows super dramatically. But I think they're going to get there. I think, again, it's reductions right now, and that probably is on the K through 12 side of things, and then reform that I think is a cap on cities and counties and maybe lowering a little bit on schools. I don't think it's as complicated as people want it to be. But I assure you, whatever comes out of the legislature is going to be complicated because you're going to have 141 different legislators in there sort of messing with things. And we'll see. Something's going to get done or else the voters are going to lose their damn minds.
I think that's going to be a test of Armstrong's leadership is to what degree can he get people on the same page for something. And that's not, obviously that's on the leaders too. Senator Hogue and Representative LaFour. Kelly's not in charge of the legislature per se, but eventually it's got to be a bill that he'll sign. To what extent can they organize the legislature around, a reform? And because a lot of those, if there's 141 different bills, there's not going to be that many. But, if there's 50, 60 different bills, they have to coalesce down into like one or two or three.
Right. And they have to defeat things quickly. Right. I mean, you can't just have 18, 19, 20 different vehicles out there on property tax
lingering around into March and April. Like they gotta take the stuff that's just not gonna find the bills that just aren't gonna get over the hump and get rid of them right away.
And I do think there's a possibility of a bunch of similar bills being introduced, and depending on who the sponsor of the bills are, them getting put by the wayside. That's the way the process normally works. But, every year or every 2 years about this time, I get frustrated with the system we have where every bill gets heard because there's so many bills. There'll be some point during the session where I'll like that again. But right now it's just sort of wrapping your head around thousands and thousands of bills that are going to be coming through. And like the citizen legislature, I worry about the amount of policy that's coming through because sometimes I think we miss things. Also, I think the other thing that's interesting, Rob, and we've talked a lot about this, is how are they going to handle that Christmas tree bill at the end of the session that they can't do anymore?
They got smacked around. They don't have that pressure relief valve anymore. That's a really good point.
They got to get stuff right the first time.
Yeah. They can't just go back and fix things. So their ability to that inhibits their ability to move quickly, less so on the bills they don't pass, but on the bills that do, once that bill's passed, they get signed by the governor. It's like, you can't just insert something in the OMB budget at the end if you have to tweak something. So that's going to be very, very interesting to see how they handle that procedurally. Let me ask you this question, switching back nationally a little bit. North Dakota is a state that, love it or hate it, we got a lot of federal money in our budget. There's a push right now. It seems that we somehow elected Elon Musk to be president and Donald Trump is vice president, or maybe Elon's going to be Speaker of the House. Maybe he's going to be de facto president and Speaker of the House. I don't know.
I saw a great picture in some publication. It was Trump, Musk, and Kevin Kramer having a conversation. It's like that. Yeah. It's an interesting group that Kevin's hanging out with these days.
I'm wondering. Obviously, I'm wondering how long Trump's going to enjoy playing second fiddle to Elon Musk. I mean, there's going to be a point where the knives come out. I think we'll see. But the interesting thing is, if there is I'm wondering if that's something that could sort of fracture the Trump movement. Is if they start trying to torpedo spending programs that are very important to the ag industry in our part of the world. Now I know Trump loves farmers, and he's very much, we saw during his first term when he was doing the tariffs, and we had farmer bailouts and everything else. So he's clearly he's sensitive to that. But I'm wondering, if they start slaughtering the budget wholesale, and from a certain point, I'm not against that at all, but politically, that could reverberate where maybe rural Americans feel betrayed. I don't know. But it's going to be interesting, and I'm wondering the degree to which our legislature needs to have a weather eye out. Can we? I brought this up in a previous interview, talking about in the context of the school lunch program. But we get sort of used to federal dollars showing up in our budget. How much of that can we take for granted right now?
Well, think about, the areas where, North Dakota is a taker state. There's no doubt about it. But agriculture is very dependent on federal stuff. Energy is very dependent on federal stuff. good and bad, right? I mean, some of the regulations can go away and be education, or tribal schools. I mean, so many things are dependent on federal. So you start saying, are we going to cut subsidies to farmers? Are we going to cut subsidies to the energy industry? Are we going to cut title spending or those kind of things on our schools? Those things will be really, really bad for the state of North Dakota. And so where do you cut that doesn't have those sort of negative consequences on someone or something? So I'm interested. I think that there probably is stuff that they can cut. But what does that look like, and how does it affect places like, I mean, again, we're a taker state, right? New York and other places send more money to the feds than they get back. So if we do a bunch of cuts, is it going to hurt Trump's base more than the blue states? Probably.
And I don't really like the term taker state, because part of the reason why is we have low population density, but still some very vital highway infrastructure that runs through that gets a lot of federal money. I mean, there's reasons for that. It's not like North Dakotans are just lazy on the dole. It's just, we're just a rural state, and it's
the way the system is set up, for sure. But we do take more back than we send.
That is absolutely true. I guess it's going to be, I think they're going to, I mean, this intense focus on fixing the budget. It is always such a political third rail, because the problem is the minute you start cutting spending, somebody's ox is getting gored. And if you cut a lot of spending, now you've got a big coalition that could turn out against you. On the other side, the simple reality is we cannot cut the budget as much as I want. And believe me, there are cuts that we absolutely can and should make. So this is me being against cutting spending. But we cannot alleviate the budget deficits by cutting a loan. We've also got to do revenues, because the fairy tale that the federal government has been selling us for a long time is that we can have big, expansive government and low taxes. And we can't. And they've been financing it with, so if the idea is they're really going to get serious about the budget deficits, the bugaboo is you're going to have to cut a bunch of spending that people like and tax a lot of people who don't want to be taxed, or raise their taxes. And that is a political nightmare. And I'm wondering, I mean, can they do it?
No. They couldn't do it in the past. I mean, Kent Conrad, tried to do this kind of stuff. Senator, who's the guy from New Hampshire, they're the budget committee chair and ranking member forever. And they talked about this. You also can't ignore the Social Security, Medicare, and how expensive that is. Things need to be done differently there. We can't do big things in this country right now. So I would not get your hopes up that they're going to be able to do anything here. Especially, I mean, the House literally, it can't pass. They're not sure if they can keep government open. There's going to be another issue for Mike Johnson getting reelected speaker again. I mean, maybe it's time to go unicameral, where it's just the U.S. Senate, because the U.S. House can't function. But I don't see.
They're going to have that discussion with 5 minutes left on the podcast on Christmas. But
I don't expect big things. I don't expect big things out of the feds.
Do you want to do a prediction for next year? Remembering also that by the time we get to the end of 2025, we're going to start seeing candidates emerging for 2026, things like that. What's your big prediction for 2025?
Oh, my big prediction, man! You didn't give me a heads up that we're going to do big predictions.
I didn't know I was going to do it either. So I'm also, while you're talking, I'm going to be trying to think.
Yeah. So. I mean, I don't know that it's a big prediction, but I do think that property tax reform is going to be the number one priority. The legislature is going to get this done. I also think we're going to see a new usage on the progressive left of the ballot measure process, and maybe not constitutional, but looking at policies. I mean, universal school meals is one that I think if the legislature doesn't do it, people should vote on it, because this is something that the people want. So I think there might be some interesting things there.
I think it's not the Democrats. Well, Representative Murphy's a Republican, but I think his abortion bill too is another one that has, real potential. Although I'm still not sure how the pro-choice side in North Dakota feels about it. I'm not. My sense is they're not going to like it very much either. But I don't know. I mean, I really haven't heard much about it.
But we did see in South Dakota there was sort of a Murphy-like bill on the ballot. You had the pro-life and pro-choice all against it down there. If I wouldn't be surprised.
Unholy alliance.
I don't know that they're working together to defeat it, but it's amazing that a bill can be an abortion ban and a pro-choice bill all at the same time.
And simultaneously go nowhere, even though every public survey available tells us that's exactly what Americans want. But there's too many people making money from either being 100% against or 100% for. I think that's...
Or just being so ideologically pure that, we can't even take a small step forward.
Yeah.
Anyway, what's your prediction? Don't put me on the spot here.
I feel like 2025 is going to be the high watermark for MAGA. I think and when I say that, there's obviously some changes that have happened that we're not I'm not talking like we're going to go back, but this turned up to 11. There's going to come a point where there's a backlash to that. I think a lot of MAGA was a backlash to the left, turning a lot of things up to 11 and keeping them there. We saw a backlash. These things are cyclical. I don't think we're not going to have another pandemic. I hope. I don't see one. We don't have the January 6th or the stolen election thing anymore. A lot of the animating factors behind MAGA are going to go away or are going away. Trump, and again, setting aside the question of his running for a third term, which he would be constitutionally prohibited from. So I'm just, until that's a thing, I'm not willing to talk about it. But assuming this is it for him, a lot of those things are going to fade. Only Trump can be Trump. I think some of those things are going to fade. We're going to see maybe a regression to the mean again.
I hope you're right.
That makes sense.
Yeah. No, it does make sense. I hope you're right. So you're hopeful by the end of 2025, we're going to be having conversations about more normal things?
Well, I think so. And when I say high watermark, I mean, I don't think it's not going to keep going up. I think we're at a plateau. We may plateau for a while. But, I kind of feel like 2024 was it. Like this was Trump's big comeback. What has the guy got left to prove? And there's just ages of reality too. Even if he wants to run for a third term, is he going to be capable? I don't know. But I really feel this was the high watermark. That's my bold prediction. Maybe December of 2025, we can revisit my bold prediction and your bold prediction. I think yours has more of a chance of being right than mine, but
mine's less bold. Mine was bold.
And in fairness, I didn't give myself a lot of leeway there either, or a lot of runway, because I didn't know I was going to ask that, and then I did. All right, well, that's it. Hey, Merry Christmas to you all, and let me say this: thank you for the people who are listening. Chad got recognized in public as one of the hosts of this show. Somebody sitting in front of him at a play recognized his voice and said, "Boy, I know that voice. I can that tone of cynicism and disaffection is resonating in my eardrums. I know that." And he turned around, and sure enough, it was Chad Oban, the famous co-host of the Plain Talk podcast. I'm joking. We're not nearly as conceited as that. Maybe Chad is. I'm not.
Maybe. I will also tell you, I ran into Representative Bob Martinson at dinner the following night, and he made a point of coming up to our table just to say how great of a job I do on the podcast. I was like, yeah, I balance out Rob. And he's like, no, Rob's great too. I was like, I know, I'm kidding.
Just give Groovy. I had to give Groovy Bob a call if he's going to be running me.
Groovy Bob, I like it.
Yeah. That's what I call him. That's one of my favorite political ads of all time. I think Tracy Potter was running against Bob Martinson for his House seat, and they was trying to make fun of the fact that Bob's been in office for a long time. And so it was playing this like groovy 60s music and then talking like he's been in there since the 70s or whatever it is. And the thing is it backfired so much because like the music was great. And like he somehow made crusty old Bob Martinson seem like the grooviest dude in town.
Well, I don't want to correct you, but Tracy Potter was the senator at that time, and there was two younger candidates really running against Bob Martinson. Yeah,
maybe. Well, whoever pulled the trigger on that ad. Although when I was talking to Tracy Potter, I thought he took credit for it. Because I was telling him...
He might have produced it, because he was running... I think that's when he was running against Margaret the first time.
Well, it was a terrible idea, because it backfired, and it made Bob seem really cool. Anyway...
It was groovy.
Yeah, well, I really appreciate it. The feedback we get from this podcast is so much fun. I love it when people email me. Even obviously people email me a lot about what I write. There's something special about when it's the podcast. I don't know, like we've kind of built this out of nothing, and it's been so much fun. I hope you all keep listening. Email us. You hear the phone number if you want to call or text or leave voicemails. We love to hear from you. Certainly appreciate it. Have a wonderful holiday. Have a wonderful new year. After, you're going to be hearing some rerun shows, and then you'll be hearing former State Senator Jessica Bell. She'll be co-hosting with a mystery guest. We're not quite sure who that's going to be yet. And then we'll be back after the first of the year. In fact, I think our first is January 8th. We'll have Auditor Josh Gallion on. So thank you once again, everyone, for listening. Certainly appreciate it. We'll talk again. That's it for today on Plain Talk, the voice of North Dakota politics. Plain Talk is a production of Forum Communications Company. Got a question, comment, or suggestion? Leave us a voicemail or send us a text message at 701-587-3141. That's 701-587-3141. If you haven't subscribed to Plain Talk yet, you can find us on YouTube or your favorite podcast platform like Spotify or Apple Podcasts. For those of you who are already hooked, give us a rating or review. And don't forget to share or tell a friend. Special thanks to my co-host Chad Oban, and from myself and everyone at Plain Talk, thanks for listening. Yeah, foo-foo dogs are forever.